Hello everybody! Welcome to the 7th devlog. Before I start the video, there's a little bit of exciting news to say. First of all, as of now, we have 368 followers. What? It might not be a big number, I guess, for the average YouTuber, but I'm just touched and very happy that so many people wanna watch the devlogs every week and everything. The comments and stuff that I've been reading are so nice and positive. The criticism is constructive. Everything is just amazing. I'm so happy. Thank you guys for the help and the positive comments and everything. It makes me really happy. So that's one thing. Moving on, my forehead is out of frame. So I'm actually going to be doing a 15-minute presentation today on my video game and introducing it to people. I'm nervous and scared. I haven't even fully prepared for it and I'm supposed to be there in 5 hours. And I guess I'll also put a video around here just so you guys can see what the presentation was like. Hopefully it went well. Is there any other material that could possibly mix more media than just writing and drawing? For example, music, sound design, cinematography, visual arts, all of that stuff. Plus the player themselves gets to interact with your arts yourself. Okay, ding ding ding, it's game development. So, yep. I'm sure it will have went well, yeah. I think this is the final thing I need to say really quickly. Basically, what I'm trying to say is we have stickers now, yay! I don't know if I'm gonna be doing international shipping because, I mean, the shipping itself is gonna be 5 times more expensive than the actual stickers. But if people are interested enough in these, maybe I can think of doing something international. But for the people who are watching in Armenia, I'm selling the stickers. DM me. Okay, that's it from the cute little newses. Let's get into the video. What are we gonna be talking about today? Firstly, like I promised in the last video, I want to introduce a cute little debugging section. So we'll be doing that first. And then the second half of the video is going to be talking about making the game clearer to the player, giving more guidance to the player, making them less confused. And we're gonna try and implement that both visually and more obviously, I guess, through text and stuff. Okay, so I wasn't able to debug every single thing that I mentioned in the last video, but I did get half of it done. The first problem was that the options screen would not go away when prompted. So for that, I made the code that controls the whole viewability of the main menu more accessible and flexible. This was the old code. This is the updated code. Now I'm able to control everything much better. As always, this is just another great example of why we should stick to OOP practices when designing code, because you never know when code gets tangled up and you don't know how to get out of it. So number 2, I introduced a back to game button in the last video, I think, just so we could easily go back to the actual game. And the issue with this was that it should not show at all until an actual game is playing under the main menu. Otherwise, a loading screen shows up and nothing loads. Basically, the way I checked that a game was playing under the main menu, it was very, very rudimentary. I just made sure to make the back to game button active once any play button was clicked. And then I basically subscribed it to one of those play button events, and the moment it was triggered, I would unsubscribe it because there was no need to check anymore if a game was playing or not. And because of that, I also decided to make sure that a game was always playing behind the main menu. So if you try to delete the game slot that you're currently playing, it's not going to allow you to do that. I think that's fine. I think it makes sense to do that. I know a lot of games do that. If that didn't make sense, basically, if you clear the game that you're currently playing and there's no game whatsoever playing under the main menu, then the back to game button should disappear. But for some reason, I did not have a good method to check for that. But I also was kind of lazy and I didn't want to make my life too hard. So I was like, okay, let's just make it so that the player isn't allowed to delete the slot that they're currently playing. Oh yeah, another bug was that when you click on the same play game slot twice, it adds in another scene, which shouldn't happen. Basically, what I was trying to say in the notes was if you click on the play button and then you basically spam it a bunch of times, then that same scene is going to load several times because there's nothing checking whether or not the game is already open. So I made sure to set that play button to uninteractable once it was already clicked, and I also changed the color so the player knows for sure that they are playing that exact slot. And then once you click on another play button in another slot, then that previous play button will be set to interactable, and I can show the code right here. That's another issue fixed. Oh, I forgot to mention about that previous bug, the one that made sure that you can't delete the game slot that you're currently playing. I added a window for that. I decided to also introduce a window that made sure you wanted to delete a game slot or not. That was really easy to implement. Here is the code. One last very small thing in terms of debugging was I said early on in one of the videos that a lot of people would clip through the edge colliders I established in the maps. One person commented under my video that you can actually change the radius on the edge colliders, which I had no idea about. So I went ahead and increased the radius, and I think because of that there won't be that issue anymore. You will not clip through the maps and the game will be playable. And that's it from the debugging, basically, nothing massive. Okay, now let's move on to the actual video. Okay, so we want to improve objective clarity within the game. How do we do that? I approached this firstly by reviewing all of the feedback that I got from the early access game, and this is what I got. A lot of people noted that the player, our cat, would spawn at random points in the scene instead of the place it exited and entered from. So there's not much continuity between the maps. Like when you walk through a door, you expect to be over here, but instead sometimes the cat would be left over here. So the reason that that happens in the first place is Unity doesn't really have object permanence or whatever. It obviously wouldn't memorize where you entered and exited from because there's no code checking that in the first place. Unity editor just spawns everything where you initially put it in a scene. So you yourself have to manually create some sort of script that checks that if you left through this part of the map, then you must spawn back in this part of the map. Depending on the game, of course, but for me, my maps are quite linear, so I had to come up with code that checked for that. To just immediately expand on that, I can explain how I handled that in my code. So I have a teleport manager, and I have the teleport coordinate script itself. So basically, the manager, if I remember correctly, is just this massive dictionary that sorts things by the current scene number and then also the coordinates that the cat has been assigned to once they leave certain map. And basically how it's fed information and gives information is there's a teleport coordinate script which is connected to a game object that moves you from one scene to another once you enter its trigger box, and it's assigned the current scene number that it's in from the build index in Unity, and it's assigned the specific coordinates that the cat should land on the moment it enters the scene. So for example, if you enter this trigger box, which the teleport coordinate script is attached to, then it gives information to the teleport manager that, okay, this is the current scene. If there's already a scene number with that index, let's overwrite it with the current coordinates. So yes, it's like a key value structure, and the key is the scene number and the value is the coordinates. It gives the teleport manager that information. If there's no key of that type, then it inputs a new key with that value and everything, and then it actually moves the cat from one scene to another. Actually, it doesn't really move the cat. I have a separate player object for every single scene, which I think is not correct. Maybe it really would be better to have just one instance of the player that you literally move from one scene to another, but I'll think about that. Anyway, what was I saying? So once you're taken to a new scene, the teleport manager triggers and gives the cat the exact coordinate that it should be on depending on the scene it is in. The moment you're in a new scene, the teleport manager searches within its keys for that specific build index, and then it returns the coordinate to the cat. I wonder how other developers have dealt with that sort of issue, but this is what I came up with. I think it works totally fine. There's just some parts where I'm kind of messy, or parts where the teleport manager is not used. The thing is, for example, I have some variations in where that teleport logic should be used, but the script isn't attached to that game object. For example, you don't always have to be walking into a trigger box to move to a new scene. You might be playing rock, paper, scissors with an NPC, and they take you to a completely new scene once you're exiting exited out of the scene, you're moved back to that old scene, if that makes sense. And because there's no script saying, okay, once you've done interacting with this character, move them back to exactly where they were when they were with the NPC, instead of back to the beginning of the map. So there are some like variations in where the logic should be used that should be fixed. Off the top of my head, there are a couple of solutions I could already implement. Maybe I could manually just use events somehow to communicate with each other that once this specific game is played, you should move them back to these coordinates. I was also given another feedback of making the interactable things one style and making non-interactable things another style. And I totally agree with that. A lot of my art is not very consistent. Sometimes I do have maps where the background is drawn with like a pencil texture. The foreground is drawn with a pen texture, but that kind of misleads the player because it makes them think that they can interact with more heavily outlined characters when in reality they can't. Or sometimes I just use the same pen texture for the background and the foreground and it confuses the player. There was one comment under one of my videos saying that I should make it more clear where the player is allowed to walk or not. And yeah, I completely agree with that. So that's something to take into account too. So yes, what I was thinking was I could standardize everything. The main streets where you can walk and anything interactable should be drawn in pen, and then anything that's not interactable, for example a faraway background, should be drawn in pencil. And I tried that out with one of the scenes. This is the before and this is the after. I think it's much better than the before thing because it causes a lot less eye strain for the player too. The only issue is I have to redraw everything, which is gonna take a while. Okay, onto the more obvious advice. If you guys remember when I was designing the mechanics, I finally decided to implement that objectives tab in the sub menu and just make everything a lot more explicit to the player. This was really easy for me to do because I already had something keeping track of the progress of the game, and that was my story manager. So this is the way it works, and I'll tell you why it's important to implementing the objectives in the sub menu. So the way the story manager works in my game is that there is one counter and there is a sub counter. They're both integers. They keep track of the progress of the game, just two integers. The counter itself represents the number of days that you pass through, and the sub counter is all of the mini things that you have to do within the day to progress to the next day. Technically, I could make everything just one integer, but that's going to be a pain for me to think about that way. So I decided to just make it two integers instead. It's just nicer to visualize it that way too. And then what you do with those integers is once one thing has been done, it increments the sub counter, and then once you've done everything, it resets both the sub counter and the counter, and you start a new day. It's as easy as that. And every time basically you enter a new scene, it takes information from the story manager. There's a switch statement that tells scene game objects what to do, whether they should be set active or whether a new sprite should be used or whether some new events should be triggered. Everything is dependent on these two integers. The reason why this is going to be very helpful for the objectives is I can literally just attach the objective script. I can literally just take the objectives script and make it listen to the story manager. So I created this action that every time a sub counter or a counter is incremented or decremented, the objectives listens to that and it changes the string of text in the objectives tab. And then I know there is quite a lot of text written within the objectives class in the first place. I know you can use a .csv file or a JSON file to handle this sort of stuff, but for now I didn't want to overcomplicate things. I just wanted to use this switch statement format just to make sure that everything was working well. When the game gets bigger and a lot more text is going to be used, I'll obviously use that method instead. So obviously besides the objectives in the submenu, you're going to expect NPCs in the real world to nudge you on where to go or how to feel about a certain situation. So I decided to add some talking. Again, if you guys might remember in the earlier videos, I really wanted to just make a game that was very, very visually heavy and used as little text as possible. But that proved to be really hard. I still find that idea very intriguing to me, just communication without words. But again, that's just really hard to implement. And I decided to rely a little bit more on words. Okay, so how did I do this? I just wanted to create these text boxes boxes next to the NPCs. When you enter their trigger box, then a little text bubble appears next to them. Besides that, I also want to add animations and little sound effects and stuff in the future to make it a little bit more lively and everything. But for now, I just wanted to implement the text boxes. Basically, the way I did that was just trigger box and tweening. The mechanic worked fine, and then I implemented it into the actual game and it worked totally fine. The actual developing part of it was very easy. The hard part is making the NPCs not sound cringe, making them feel a little bit more alive and genuine, especially for NPCs like your best friend, that they're not just background characters, they're secondary characters, so they need to have more of a life than the average background character. That's something I need to think about story-wise. Well, for example, for background characters, it doesn't really matter so much what you write in the text boxes. With my NPC interactions, you just need to walk past them and they'll say something, and if you care enough, you'll stop and read what they have to say. You don't really need to put much thought into what they're saying, just establish the atmosphere of the current scene you're in. I think there were a couple of other little issues related to the clarity in the game. One of them was also my handwritten text. For example, when you are introduced to the health bar for the first time, or you're introduced to the duduk for the first time, my instructions are handwritten and they're not very clear to read for some people. And then on top of that, when I also introduce language translation and everything, there needs to be some sort of standardized text box that I can gather and manipulate very easily. Okay, so that was basically it for this video. In the next one, we will be talking about polishing and debugging the existing mechanics, because there's a couple of things to be fixing up a little bit. For example, the options screen, which we haven't gotten to yet. And then we'll be looking at the feedback given by one person who had this pretty big and very helpful document that they sent over on our Discord server. I'd like to look at that and see what I can improve. And yeah, and finally, if we have time, I would like to try and experiment with a new and improved mechanic for the duduk. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it or you didn't like it, please let me know in the comments. Okay, thank you. Bye.